even when you have a dark day for one reason or another, even as the California wildfires were hitting, oh my God, it was awful.
Yeah.
And I saw that play out in every place I look, but there were also people, helping on the scene and planning forward and connecting and figuring out how to, use this opportunity, which sounds crummy because it was an awful thing, but how can we use this to help people? How can we move things forward? And, I feel people are less stunned to the point where they can't do anything, and now they're just ready to act.
Yeah.
Because we do have good people working on it.
You're listening to Granite Goodness, the show about optimism, progress, solutions, and problem solving in and around New Hampshire. My name is Andy DeMeo, and today we'll be coming to you from the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship in Keene, New Hampshire, where I am talking to Maria Finnegan. Maria works at the organization New Hampshire Healthy Climate as their director of CHICS, the Climate and Health Initiative for Caregivers and Kids. We talk about navigating the doom and gloom of climate change, modern journalism, solving hard problems, what we love about rural New Hampshire, and many other things on this episode of Granite Goodness. I hope you enjoy it. Maria Finnegan, welcome to Granite Goodness.
Thank you. This is really a pleasure.
Why is that?
Well, we sort of touched on it a little bit before. Positivity is really needed right now.
Yeah.
And I'm a media hawk. I've been in the media. I love the media. I live for it, and it's even weighing on me a little bit too much.
Sure.
So it's a good place to be able to come to find the good things happening in the state, and around the country. I mean, you've got connections that branch out from the state, so that's very positive.
Yeah. No, it is a real thing. There's this whole movement, right, and we had a wonderful conversation about this on LinkedIn. We chatted a bit, and I felt like once I started messaging you, I was like, this person gets it. This is my kind of person. And it's wonderful. You're actually the first person, Maria, who, well, actually, I think another person, the woman from Bring Back the Trades, Shana Brunier. Do you know Shana?
Just for your podcast.
Yeah. So she, I think, has had some media experience as well, maybe on the production side. But other than her, and I think yours is probably more experience than her, but you're more or less the first person to be on the show who has any kind of media background, which is, I actually was supposed to talk to another journalist person today, but I had to reschedule with her. But I'm really excited to talk to you because your work is so interesting, covers all these different things. You tie them together, and it's climate and health and kids and all this different stuff.
Yeah.
And the perspective of this show, right? I'm not against traditional journalism, certainly not. It's important that people, get training and they take it seriously and are skilled and try to assess the issues from a non-biased perspective and educate citizens, right? That's great. That's what we all want. But, there's all the other ugly pieces,
Right.
the incentive to dramatize and make things terrifying and put them out of context. And, so I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with someone who is, very literally on the solution side of some of our really big problems, but who also brings this perspective of, hey, this is how we're used to framing problems in journalism and media. What's good about that? What's not, right? So
yeah,
I'm very excited to talk to you.
Wow, I hope I live up to it. Thank you.
So could you start, maybe tell me a little bit about your relationship with New Hampshire?
Oh, boy. Well, it's a lifelong love. It depends on, I've always said it depends on who I'm speaking to. They say, are you from New Hampshire? Big question around here.
Right.
Not as important as it used to be, which is nice, but still, that people want to know where your cred is. And to someone in New Hampshire, I'll say, yes, I spent the first chunk of my life here. I grew up here as a kid. I lived in Milford. And my grandfather was the town optometrist.
No kidding.
Dr. Kelly, shout out. Some people still remember him, which I love. But I had this really cool opportunity to be the grandchild of somebody who was beloved in the town.
Yeah.
And to go around with him, and people would say hello to him. He had this relationship with the people, and he and my grandmother were both, very involved in the town. So I got to spend that time outside. I went to Girl Scout camp in Wilton. I had this great childhood, and then my mom remarried, and we moved to right outside of D.C., Arlington.
Yeah.
And at the time, that was difficult for me as such a diehard New Hampshire person,
Right.
and being so close to my grandparents. But it really was a great move for me because Arlington, you're basically in D.C. It's
Right.
this whole new world, so much opportunity. The school that I went to was great. And I still got to come back to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And in the summer, I would just continue to run free and come up at Christmas as well. So when I first moved, my nickname was In New Hampshire, in New Hampshire.
What?
I know.
That's not catchy at all.
I know. Well, we had this little table in 3rd or 4th grade, and I was always talking about the place because I loved it so much, and it's something that's always stuck with me. My grandparents, we had to move them out of New Hampshire. I think it was about 2004 that happened, and it was always my goal to come back. And it was really just this feeling that I couldn't put a finger on, and I tried coming back at different points. It wasn't going to be after college. I went into media and major market. It wasn't going to be even after I left the media. That wasn't the right time.
Yeah.
Just trying to find that right time, and I was able to do that in 2018 to come back up. And then it was, who am I in this New Hampshire now?
Yeah.
In 2018 New Hampshire, which is different.
Right.
I'm also a grown-up, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
what does it mean to not just be a kid with no responsibilities?
You're not in New Hampshire anymore.
I know, I'm not
Or
New
maybe-
Hampshire
maybe you
girl.
are.
I'm grown-up Maria. So, but I just, having that experience, and it's not unique. I mean, I can't remember how many people you've spoken with who have left and come back.
Boomerangs is what they call them at Stay Work Play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, shout out. So I love Stay Work Play.
Yeah.
I think I know what's different about me is I was forcibly moved. Just kidding. I mean, it was something that happened before, and I really could have just at that point, it could have just been a part of my past that didn't impact it. But I didn't have a clear cut. I was coming back every year, and it's just a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And it really stuck with me what being a kid here did for my confidence, my independence. Of course, it had something to do with my grandparents and my mom, and then my dad. I can't credit everything to the state, but that small town connection was still really important to me. And the freedom I felt, with just being in more of a natural area. So I finally made the move back, and I'm even in a smaller town than I grew up with, as a kid in Dublin, which is where I am. And my mom, when I made that move, she's like, Maria, there's not a 24-hour CVS.
What are you going to do?
I know. It's like, I've lived like this before. And it's just, you make changes, you adapt. But I love it. And since being back, it's just been this process of really getting involved. And that's been a lot of fun.
So I'm very curious, your grandfather's career in, healthcare, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Did that have any influence on, your work now is very related to healthy communities, healthy kids? Like you talked about the legacy of your grandfather and, having someone who, was beloved by the community and, as a kind of medical practitioner, right? I don't know. I'm just curious, is there any relationship there?
I think the reason my eyes are opening is that no one's ever asked me that, and it's a good question because I can see, the connection. I would say I didn't get into the medical field because I'm easily grossed out by blood and guts and everything. And
you assume they're all not squeamish.
I know. Right? Well, I know. But it's kind of interesting. Sometimes I've looked back and wondered why I didn't, become an optometrist. Yeah. My grandfather became one because someone who was important in his life, his Uncle Doc was one, and it was just kind of the path. The place where it really, resonates, that stuck with me, was his relationship with people. He would say to me, Maria, I have people come in and I just don't say anything and I just listen to them.
Interesting.
And he's like, if you just let people talk, you can learn so much about people. And that was really, that informed, like that approach was his life. You know, he was a registered independent.
Yeah.
Because he liked having people come to his door,
Right,
and talk to him,
Yeah.
you know, about their perspectives. I remember, my grandmother was raised Catholic. She was a devout Catholic. Went to St. Patrick's Church in Milford. My grandpa was, I believe, a Unitarian, which is
Yeah.
crazy for the time, and also crazy that he married a Catholic. But he would let like different people from different religions come to the door. Like
Yeah.
the Jehovah's Witnesses would come to the door, and he would just listen to them because he was so interested in hearing people's stories. And I don't know, you know, his story is somewhat unique, but everybody has one. And I
Right.
think he figured that out. And that's, you know, as I think about my path, which did start out in media, it started out at, you know, at the top of media and has trickled down to where I am and what I'm doing. You know, I might wonder, how did I get here? And it's that childhood, and it's the experience of having my grandparents that's been the answer, because it was so important for them to be a part of something, be giving back to something.
Right.
You know, and to another extent, like my parents are the same way, and the way they gave back to charities and things like that. You know, I don't think I could be a corporate girly. I hear it's the cool thing, but I've tried at different points, and I don't last because I have to be a part of something. And it's almost overwhelming because there are so many things, so many causes, you know, and what's the one that you connect with? And for me, it's been climate. I've tried other ones out. I'm still into politics, but this is the thing I want to help solve right now.
Yeah.
So that's
well, it's
what
a
I'm
kind
doing.
of it's a kind of mega issue, right? You know, one of the things I find cool about your work, right, is people often talk about, you know, the interconnectedness. Intersectionality has kind of become a buzzword, and it justifiably, right? Like it's a thing we should be thinking about. But you know, climate really is like, it's what isn't affected by it, what isn't related to it, right?
Right.
But you kind of pair two mega connectors, that, right? Like climate and health.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Like those two things alone are like, everyone lives, everyone experiences the climate, and everyone is alive and has an opinion on their health or the health of their family and their community, their friends, right? So it's like you are almost in this niche that is like the node of nodes, in my view, and you know, and I feel like it's not by accident, you know, like your passion maybe for wanting to touch, and it's like issue indecision. It's like when you're at the grocery store and there's 8 million cereals. It's like, I wish there were just 3. You know, like, would it be easier if there were just 3 big problems to focus on?
That's a good point. That's a very good point. I had somebody, you know, one of my favorite things is to have, I don't want to say my world rocked, but like to learn something new that kind of like stops me in my tracks. And I had somebody use the word threat multiplier for climate. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. That's it. And you've just done it again, in that you're pointing out that by working in climate, I do get to work on all those other things that I care about, right? And, you know, that's the reason it is. I mean, at the heart of it, I came into it because I came back to New Hampshire and I was like, something is different here. You know, the weather, the climate, just things had clearly changed, right? And that was what kind of pushed me into it initially. And then I had a kid and I was like, oh my God, this is no longer just about me, right? I've created this mini me, and I'm worried about him. So, you know, those were the two that kind of pushed me into it. But then I started to realize how it's going to, and it is already impacting all the other crises that we either have now or are facing, you know, childcare, housing, just all of these different, like food insecurity. Climate is this overarching umbrella that is already making an impact.
Right. And
by addressing it, you know, I'm able to help all the other things I want to help, you know? Like that's spot on.
So this is a good opportunity, right? Because, you know, the way that you're talking about your work is very people-centered, right? Like it's, I mean, obviously you're a systems thinker, like you're educated, you're experienced, you know, all the high-level way of thinking about these issues. But, you know, when I hear you talk about it, it's like, I care about my son, right? I care about the impact this has on real living human people, right? And climate, for all of its importance, I think, again, you get this because you know media, like it's easy to make it abstract, right? Like when you talk to the average person, who I like the average person, by the way. People always make fun of them. But, you say, hey, it's very roundabout, right? Of like the emissions from the power generation in your car and the cows and the methane, like it's all accumulating and very slowly over time it adds up. And there's these impacts that are hard to predict, but we know that they're, disruptive and all that. Like it's just a lot of people have a hard time, I think, connecting that to like, the price of eggs is always the go-to stupid thing, right? Like that's the supposedly the end all when people say it's the economy stupid, right?
Right.
And that's a whole other tangent we could go into.
Yeah.
But to ask a more direct question, like, could you help like bring this issue down to scale for people? Like when you say, I work on climate,
Right.
what does that mean? Like what exactly, like how do you view your work? How does it fit into that umbrella of abstraction for thinking about this issue?
Yeah, it's funny to hear you say the average person, because I think we're all like average in something.
Yeah.
And like
I'm below average in like 7 things.
No, I was just thinking, like even in climate, I am an average person in some parts of it, right?
Sure.
Like, and I think one way that being in climate almost works against itself is that it seems like there can be a hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And there can be people who know a lot about one topic, and then people in the other field feel like, oh, well, I'm not up to their level. Like, should I even be there? And I have that issue sometimes.
Yeah.
I can't tell you I know a ton about carbon pricing, and, I'm not the best with some of the higher tech solutions, and I leave that work to the great people who are doing solar.
Right.
Because that's not how my brain works.
Yeah.
My work is around the people, right? That's an important part of this. And, for me, when I started to get into this work, I had this kind of, I describe it as like a bubble up here. I knew I wanted to be working around children and climate and health, and I didn't even know what that meant yet.
Yeah.
I just was beginning to learn about how acutely these climate impacts, affect children.
Yeah.
Because their bodies are still developing, and everything that, adults struggle with, the children, they feel it 10 times because they're just not able to take on, poor air quality, heat, everything that is the result of climate change is just harder on them.
Yeah.
So, I found this opportunity to do this work around, hopefully changing people's minds, reaching out sometimes on a one-on-one level, but hopefully, for the ability to reach more people at once, that'd be nice. But just trying to change, I don't know, it's a weird thing to even talk about, because it's helping them to make, as to your point, a one-on-one connection with something that is so vast, right? And that's difficult. I got an email today from, Yale Center for Climate Communications, and they're just like, what, are you having trouble connecting? Like, what are some barriers you see to getting through to people? And no one has solved this yet. All the data we have is like, X number of people believe in this and X number of people want solutions, and yet we find ourselves moving backwards. Like, what's the missing link? And to me, it is the children. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, you care about your kids. Right? And the eye-opening thing for me, climate change just continues to seem like this far-off issue, especially in New Hampshire, where, it's like 10 degrees out today, and that's always the excuse around why are we not taking action now.
Yeah.
But helping people to understand that there has been a lot of change here, and it is having an impact now.
Right.
And, where I'm coming from with my organization and my work is we are trying to both mitigate and adapt, right?
Yeah.
So we recognize the situation, the reality of the world now, and we are working to educate, empower children around that reality, like to be present and capable in this current environment, so that they can go on, and be a part of that mitigation effort. But as you're teaching people about these current impacts, we're hoping that it will lead to more mitigation action around solutions.
Yeah. When you say that, you have trouble connecting, or as an example, like, who are the sort of, you mentioned kids as one, demographic, which is a weird thing to say because it's like children, but I know what you mean, right? Of like, who doesn't want to, in conversations, interactions with kids to leave them feeling, more capable, hopeful, educated about, their lives in the future, right? Like, no one is against that. But, like, I'm just curious, like, who are some of these other people? Like, is it lawmakers? Is it business people? Is it like people in the community? Like, who are some of the people who you are trying to reach, so to speak, with your work and your messaging that you feel like, I don't know if it always lands?
What's crazy is I think it lands the most with kids.
Okay.
Kids get it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways we hamper our progress is by this idea that kids need to be protected from some of this information,
Sure.
like that they're not going to understand it. Kids now have crazy access to information all the time. Like, think about you as an adult, how overwhelmed you feel, right? Constant information.
That's why I'm doing this show.
I know. Like, one of the things that's just like my husband and I remark on sometimes is we're like, wow, if my son, wants to watch Frog and Toad, which is a great show, all he has to do, it's there. It's available.
Yeah.
Unlike, something when we were growing up where you'd have to wait for it to be on, right?
Oh, yeah. Do you remember the sound the computer used to... And there's one computer in the house,
Exactly. It's a totally different experience. Kids, whether they like it or not, have access to all of this information. The adults around them are speaking about different things, so they pick up on this stuff. And I learned that myself at an event, an Earth Day event, when I was going to go speak, and I was just like, can I talk about climate change, And
Right.
and the director gets up and she just lays it out there, and I was just like, oh, and the kids didn't flinch.
Yeah.
Because they're more aware of things. So, the big thing for kids is to listen to their worries, not to downplay them, like because they're already thinking about these kind of things.
Yeah.
And, when we have extreme weather, when we have heat and storms, they're not oblivious, they pick up on it.
Right.
So do you have kids in elementary school, middle school who know this is happening, right? So for the children, it's all about how we present this problem in my work. We're not trying to scare them. We're trying to empower them.
Right.
The difficulty I have is with every other adult. Like all the ones you listed, the lawmakers, the parents, the business people, helping them to understand this is a current and present and future problem, all of the above.
Yeah.
It's difficult because I've been in other aspects of, health services, human services. Like, there are very pressing problems. People need a place to sleep sometimes. They need to feed their family. And I understand how that comes to the front, right? Because that is a very present, current problem. If you can't fix that, the other stuff is moot. So I get that. But I want this to be moving parallel with it. I want alongside, because prevention is key. If we're just playing catch up all the time.
Hello. Howdy. Come on in. You're not interrupting? Oh my gosh.
I didn't know you would be here.
I got a tip, and I was like, oh my God.
At this point, my conversation with Maria was interrupted by a visit from Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, who Maria kindly introduced me to. We resumed our chat shortly after.
I mean, that was just perfect. So I don't think that's happened on any of your other podcasts.
Certainly not.
All right.
Yeah, her face when she saw you, she was like, ah!
I know. It's just like, it's perfect because I think it really kind of, I don't know if the word is encapsulate, but like what it is to be me. Like, I'm not one thing. So it's like the world's colliding. So I'm here talking about climate, but then my political side pops in, right?
Yeah.
And someone who I care about because I think she's a good person and what she's going to do for our state just happens to pop in. And, I've had the opportunity to meet Juliana. Like, it was like a New Hampshire moment unfolded, right here. And then, giving her the opportunity for to see your work. Of course she's interested in it, and that was
Yeah,
just,
that made me very
and
happy.
then Nick, who I'd met, I don't know, a couple of years ago when he was working with Andy Custer, was just like, hey man, you again.
How you
He's like,
doing?
hey, he's like,
Yeah.
I owe you an email. It's like, it's fine. We're all working towards a good thing. Right. And I think that's something you pointed out. Like when you are working on progress, when you're working to make things better, you start to see the same people.
Yeah.
Over and over. They keep showing up.
Right.
And the conversation I was having with the other side of that cool explosion was like, what can we do? Let's get to work.
Yeah.
Like what's next? And let's figure something out. And that's always, it's right in line with your mission. It's always better than feeling helpless.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what can we do next?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, even the act of attempting is
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was even just talking about this with Juliana like an hour ago. Right. She was telling me about a session that they had at the end of Radically Rural. It was all about like, hey, we don't think anyone's going to show up, but let's just have it because I want to talk about it. Let's have a little session in the morning, very casual, cozy. We'll show up in our pajamas, and we'll talk about like economics and like how to make just a better economy. Like this is a dry, very large, complicated topic that like normally is beyond the scope of what we do at Radically Rural. But like we want to talk about like donut economics and how to make it more non-zero sum and all these things. And she's like, I thought 10 people were going to show up, and like 50 people showed up. And so there was such an appetite for that conversation.
Yeah.
And one of the people who did come later on was like, I didn't like that conversation because it just felt like, so overwhelming, this huge thing. And a lot of the other feedback was, I'm so glad that we finally were able to talk about this. So there's this funny disconnect that some people have. Like some people view progress as like, it's until it's like done and perfect.
Right.
Then I'm not comfortable thinking about it. And other
Right.
people are like, I'll take a conversation, and the act of being here and discussing it is a sign of something good. And like, and I'm very much oriented towards the latter of those two attitudes.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's like you can't write going back to the media, you can't write a story about something in progress, right? Like, this might happen and it's on its way, and it's like, who cares? It's always like you have to focus on the end point, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much good stuff going on. We have not solved X, Y, and Z, right? But we're doing all these things.
Yeah.
Like these things are happening. And then when you get to see what's going on, that you feel better about it. And, I remember that, there's this idea that you always want to be a part of a winning team.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the quickest, easiest way to get people going, like to get the momentum. To jump on the momentum. And there's a ton of stuff happening in New Hampshire. And, I think sometimes what gets put out is that, like, depending on who's in the governor's chair or what party is leading in the House or this, that's going to direct everything.
Yeah.
But you go on a town by town basis and there's amazing stuff happening.
Yeah.
And at the hyper local level, and that's like a New Hampshire thing, and it's
Yeah.
awesome.
And there is a lot of activity. Again, like it's. I'm not even gonna say that. There is a lot of stuff that happens that is kind of away from like the typical fault lines of the political conversation, right? Like the more local you get, even I think the easier it is to be like, what, we don't have to make this a national issue. Like this is just me and my neighbor Dale deciding how much are we going to increase the tax rate so we can have a functioning sewer. Like we can talk about this, it's just like all these things like that. And, there is this robust tradition of direct democracy in New Hampshire that I think like lends itself well to local solutions because there is abundant social capital here. And it's a very special thing that like, is to be treasured and celebrated in my view.
I think so too. So where were we?
I didn't even know. Just for some context, we were talking. This was a semi-planned. We're here at the Hannah Grimes Center today in Keene, and the wonderful executive director Juliana Dodson, who I was chatting with earlier, mentioned, hey, the new Congresswoman for District 2 in New Hampshire, Maggie Goodlander, is going to be stopping by today, and I was like, whoa. maybe I can trip in front of her or something. That'd be cool to meet her. And she was like, hey, I'll arrange. We'll just come and interrupt your interview. So Maria actually knows the congresswoman, and they knocked on the door and came in, and we had a wonderful little interaction, and it was fun.
It was fun. it was peak New Hampshire. And it's so it kind of makes me think about my experience being a New Hampshire person, and then like a DC person, and a New Hampshire person. And when I was in DC, I worked on Capitol Hill for a little while, at one of the parties, you'll probably guess. And, I had some access, like got to go to a few events where we'd have politicians, including the big ones at the time.
Yeah.
But the access here is just crazy, you know, like I've seen Maggie twice, like in a week, and just like, they're so accessible. And then, when I would go down, I remember being down in Washington in 2019 and peak primary season up here. And everybody there was coming up to me and asking me about the candidates. People in D.C. were asking me about, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, like all of these people who'd been coming through because I'd met them all. Yeah. Because it's so easy.
Right.
And that was striking to me because you're in the center of the, free world in D.C. Basically, I remember not being able to get places because of motorcades.
Right.
Right? But you still have more access. And who knows if the primary will lose it or if it'll come back. I mean, I know the Republican Party came through this time, but it was there wasn't really a point. We kind of knew what was going to happen. Yeah. So, but when there's an open primary and there's a lot of excitement, it's just this incredible access, and opportunity to weigh in. And I hope we don't lose it. I understand why we would, because our demographics don't necessarily represent the country.
Democracy changes.
It does, and it's been fun. And then even if we do, we still have the ability to reach out to our senators, to our congresspeople, and make our voices heard. So I love that.
There is something beautiful and strange and charming about I think people have analyzed it, right? And it's like the predictive power of, the first vote in Dixville Notch is complete. There's nothing there. There's really no, other than some special juju of maybe twice, I think the person who won that vote ended up being the president. But there's something charming to the myth of it, of these four random ancient people in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire, how they vote at midnight is that's gonna be the bellwether for a country of 330 million people.
But also, Dixville Notch is what people think of New Hampshire. So I'll get texts from my friends in D.C. being like, hey, were you in Dixville Notch this morning? I'm like, no, for the last time, I don't live there.
Right. It's quite far from me.
It's far, but that's what gets pushed out, And it's funny because it is a show, but it was the first thing my husband told me that morning was who voted in Dixville Notch. And he was like, well, it was so different. Because it's New Hampshire, people who voted for the president, it was different than who voted for, for our congressperson.
Right, the split ticket,
And then in the governor, it was all over the place. And it was just kind of well, I don't know what's going to happen. And we didn't know because it was so up in the air. But I think, that's, as things change for the better a lot of the time, in the state, it's still fun to have those nostalgia things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's trying to figure out how we can keep Dixville Notch going.
Right. Well, one of my favorite interviews for someone who came on, this wonderful woman, her name is Sarah Palermo.
I know Sarah.
Yeah, so great. I'm not surprised you do.
Sarah's great.
She told me, also comes from a career in journalism.
Yep.
She had this assignment once, I think for the Keene Sentinel, where it was her idea. She was like, hey, listen, Ron Paul's going to be around here. And, he infamously, to show off his health, rides a bike around. People are like, you're too old, Ron Paul. And he's like, no, I'll ride a bike to show you how in shape I am as a cardiologist or whatever he is.
Wow.
And she was like, so I might have the opportunity to interview him. I just have to keep up with him on a bike.
That's amazing.
And she managed to do it. So there's this great picture of her riding with Ron Paul, I
gotta see that.
Well, it's just
That's a hoot.
It's the hokey tradition, the idea of Mitt Romney shows up here and he just he has to eat some strange hot dog in the middle of nowhere to prove his virtue to the rural people of New Hampshire, like, you can't not love it.
Well,
know?
I told you we get off on various tangents. The last one I'll say about this, the story in our family was how my grandmother met Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
She was at a restaurant that doesn't exist anymore in Milford, Aisha's, which I loved because it had amazing grilled cheese. It was very important when you're 6.
It's like nothing's more important than that.
Nothing's more important than good grilled cheese. My grandmother was there, I think, with a friend, and she'd bitten out this. The idea of my grandmother having anything on her hands is why this is so funny, but like she'd bitten into a sandwich and she'd gotten like mayonnaise on her hands, and she said a hand just stuck out in front of her, into her face out of the darkness, and she reflexively put her hand out to shake it, and it was Bill Clinton.
Oh my God.
And, in 1990, 1991.
The mayonnaise hand,
and he shook it, and he kind of pulled his hand back, and my grandmother was horrified, of course, and he just laughed, and he said, I'm Bill Clinton, and within the accent that I can't do, I'm running for governor, I'm from Arkansas, and she came home, and she told my grandfather, and we were everybody thought it was so funny in the moment, but then of course he becomes president.
Right.
You're like, oh my God, but
that guy, I touched his mayonnaise hand.
Yeah, the mayonnaise. And I still think about that because, we were talking about before, in terms of how things get done. It's at that local level. So even though you have somebody on television, speaking to the entire country, they're still a person.
Yeah.
And you still get to be one-on-one with them. And when you get to that point, they are just people.
Right.
Right. And that is, I feel like, as journalism has changed, as the media has changed, it's easier to kind of almost put them up on a pedestal as something different.
Yeah.
And it's that hand-to-hand politicking that's really the fun stuff. Literally mayonnaise hand to Bill Clinton's hand.
Yeah.
Politicking.
Well, there is something to that, right? Like this whole notion of authenticity, right? And there's too many takes on the election, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of them that I thought was like interesting and salient was, is like, okay, whatever people think of someone like Trump, he doesn't tend to speak with a teleprompter, right? He just like says whatever, and that authenticity, whether it's consistent or not is like a whole other thing, but people are attracted to that as opposed to like, the alternative, which is like, hey, we're going to be really measured about how we speak because, we take seriously like, oh, what words make it into a speech.
Right.
We want to be careful, precise, right? But if there's too much of that, people can see it and say, well, this guy just talks. And then, these other people, it's all on a teleprompter, right? So this whole question of like, and I think underneath it is exactly the thing you're talking about of like, is this a leader I can relate to, right? Is this question on everyone's mind? And, the whole issue of like, is the person who makes their way to me via, newspaper and video and all this, like, how different is that from the real person? Is it even possible to know the real person? Like, it's an endlessly fascinating question. I mean, even like Augustus Caesar, right, was heavily propagandized. Like, they put his face and likeness on coins in ancient Rome, and it was very specific how and why they did it. And because he wanted to project an image of, this young, virile, capable leader, and they had like the young him on the coin, and he would have been like 55 at that time, right? So it's like, it's all, it's a problem as old as time when it comes to like humanizing big decisions in leadership, I guess.
Well, you can tell a person's voice changes when they go off script, right? When you're reading something, like, it's just very obvious, unless you're like one of the best orators we've ever had, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think one person in history that in my time has been Obama, that he has been able to read from a teleprompter and speak, but he also... Yeah,
he's a good speaker.
He also has the ability just to speak off the cuff, and that is hard.
Right.
To keep all those things in your head, and then while you're doing that, remember what you're not supposed to say. I think that's even harder.
Yeah.
To keep all the things, you're just like, that's, for me, that's difficult. And, being in the field I'm in now, like, I am, in my personal life, politics has been a part of it since I was a kid.
Right.
Like, I lived in Milford. You know, my grandpa got 2 newspapers. I watched the NewsHour with him every night, and whether I liked it or not, it was something I was aware of.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you get into some of these fields, especially here, you know, there's this really focus on being bipartisan, being nonpartisan, and like remembering when I have to click into public mode a lot and just be careful. I don't want to say careful, but like thoughtful with what I say, right? And I think what's interesting about that is how, you know, I don't know if that's working so well for us anymore because the line is blurring a little bit. It's no longer just one party, other party. It's science, you know, and it's our community and humans.
Right.
And it's trying to, like, I was thinking about it before. I was like, I'm no longer in a party. I'm in the party of helping people. And I don't know what side that is.
Yeah.
Right, you know, and it also irks me a little bit that religions are being claimed, you know, by one party.
Yeah.
Right, you know, and I go to church, like, what does that make me? You know, does it make me automatically in one, or am I in the other? And, you know, what do you hear, what do you expect to hear in a sermon? You know, it's just, it's a time where I feel like a lot of the ways we separate people, it's changing. And we saw that in the polling of the election.
Yeah.
People thought they knew what people were going to do, and they didn't.
Right.
It was wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Because people are complicated.
Yeah.
You can't just like, you know, I'm a mom. That's not my personality.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and I don't, it's not the only thing I'm interested in. It's not the only way I make decisions.
Right.
So why only think I'm going to vote a certain way?
Yeah.
You know, and that's it's an opportunity for us to understand the people around us a little bit better.
Yeah.
And connect with them.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm almost more interested in the people that I think I probably don't agree with on things, right? I'm just like, I know what the people I agree with think, but like the people who don't, why?
Right.
You know, like it's like, I think we should try to be, and I understand when people, you know, don't feel this way, but like, I don't know, particularly as someone who does this show, like it very much is not, I mean, I have politicians on, right? Like I've had, you know, Emmett Soldati came on.
Emmett. I love that guy.
Great.
He should be president too.
Yeah.
Let's go, people.
I'd take him, you know. But, you know, Joe Sweeney's going to come on next week. He's very active in the state Republican Party. He seems like a super nice guy. He's like doing all these things. Like he's very invested in trying to make the town of Salem like better. And I'm like, great, I want to talk to him too, right? Emmett told a really interesting story that's, you know, relevant to kind of what you're saying. He told me about this time somewhere, I think, New Hampshire, when he was running for you know, District 5 or whatever. I think it's District 5. When he was running for executive council,
They've changed it a few times.
Yeah.
He was in my district, but not anymore.
Yeah. But he was talking at an event and, you know, doing his like, not usual stump, because he's a really authentic guy. And he is actually a really good speaker.
Yeah.
Like he's very good at that, kind of like Obama. Keeps it all together, is coherent, authentic, manages to do it all at once. But he gave his talk, and, you know, he had this woman come up to him afterwards. She was like, I loved what you said. And like, I'm going to vote for you. And he was like, great, thank you. And then someone else came up to him afterward. He was like, do you know who that woman is? He was like, no. And they said she was at January 6th. That was like a January 6th, you know, protest or whatever, right? And he was like, oh, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, that like, in one respect, right? Like on paper, I'm a Democrat. And then here's a person who, you know, may not be.
Wow.
Like it's exactly as you say, this kind of breakdown of affiliation and identity and, you know, political beliefs. Like it's all messy and it's changing all the time.
It is.
And, you know, it's just it's a really interesting anecdote, you know?
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest informing experiences that I've had is, so when my grandfather came here, he and my grandmother were both from very, very rural upstate New York, Lewis County. It's a nearby town is called Boonville, and I'm not making that up. And that's the big town nearby. But yeah, that's where my grandmother, both sides immigrated in the 1800s, and you know, my grandfather went to World War II. He came back, and on the GI Bill, he went to optometry school.
Yeah.
And they spent the summer before this move in our shack up in upstate New York. It's kind of like our family place that's like 170 years old.
Are shacked by Boonville.
I know.
Meet me
That's all you
there.
need to know. That's all you need to know. But then my grandfather bought the practice in Milford, and that's how, like, it was that time where it's like, well, where do I find a practice that already exists? I don't know how people found things back then. Like,
Right.
if it was in the optometry times, I don't know. But
Yeah.
it was the practice he bought. So we left upstate New York. But we have kept the connection there. We have the place. We call it the camp. It's amazing. One side of my family, my background, I don't know a lot.
Right.
You know, on the other side, I know a lot, and that's because I can go to the town. I can see the graves. I can see the roads that have our names on them. You know, and we go up there every summer, and it's been a huge part of my life. And I started to see a shift there, really in 2008, 2009 with the downturn. You know, there's a city there, Rome. It's about 35 minutes away from the camp. We have Utica as well. That's a bit farther. Syracuse, an hour and a half away. And seeing what that did to New York State, the people
Right.
of New York State. It took out so much industry. It took away people's livelihoods. People were really suffering, and you could see that. You could see the change happening. You know, I remember coming back around that time, and it was bleak. You know, people didn't have a lot of money. People weren't working. I remember going into a bar at like on a Tuesday at 2:30. I don't know why I was there, but there were people there sitting there, and I was
Right.
like, "Oh, it's interesting." You know, like this is what's happening, and that continued through 2016.
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, New York State went a certain way, but I remember being like, this, you know, I knew people were upset, and it was helpful to understand why things had changed because I had seen it.
Yeah.
You know, and there's still a big chip on the shoulder up there.
Right.
What's interesting now, I mean, not this winter because they've been pummeled with snow, but as climate change has impacted that part of the state, you know, the way they were able to rebound was with winter sports. They had snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, all of these things. They didn't have snow for a couple of years, and
Yeah.
it was like everything was happening again.
Yeah.
And to see that very red area grappling with something that's considered to be blue,
Yeah.
you know. But I go back every summer, and I talk to people I've known all my life up there, you know, and some that I don't know,
Yeah.
and hear what they have to say,
Right.
you know. And this summer, I had Edna Cullings, who I've known again forever. She's married to Tommy. Tommy is I think he's the longest continuous homestead, either in the county or in the state. I don't know, that
Oh
might
my
be
God.
too much, but they've been there a long time. And of course, they're our cousins.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Our cousin Tommy on the homestead in the shack by Boonville.
He's the guy who plows the roads,
Yeah.
digs the graves, builds the houses. She said to me, "It's been getting warmer here."
Right.
And I was just like, okay, it's getting through. She's seen it the last,
Right,
I think
you would
she's got to be
notice.
70 plus. She's seen it.
Yeah.
And there have been so many times where I've made a connection with her where I understand that we are not so far apart,
Right.
you know, and that's really where I go with. And Juliana and I were just saying, like, you know, it might seem tough right now, but we're coming out, people are starting to come together again. Like, this is going to bring people together.
Yeah.
So I feel positive about it, even though it's scary right now.
Yeah. No,
I'd
I
say.
mean, I think you're right to point that out. I mean, people who they study disasters and crises, like it's always interesting that the narratives that come out of things like Hurricane Katrina and, you know, even the wildfires, right, that have just happened. It's all horrible stuff, right? That
Right.
like we should really try to prevent, and we can prevent, like, you know, man-made stuff. That being said, you know, in times of crisis, like it's so much more common for people to come together, be cooperative.
Yeah.
You know, like all the horrible things you hear of, like everyone just becomes an animal and they start looting things. Like,
Right.
yeah, maybe 1% of the people do stuff like that, but really, it's like, and it's like, okay, what are you going to orient towards, right?
Yeah.
Like that, because it's going to sell you newspapers, or
Yeah.
like, or the 10,000,001 amazing stories of cooperation and generosity, right? That like
Right.
come out, and, you know, for better or for worse, like I'd like to believe both things, Maria, right? That
Yeah.
our crisis can bring out the best in people, but that also
Right.
we can collectively be rational and think ahead and prevent big things from going badly, or at least mitigating the worst version of them, right? Well, there's a good argument to be made. We're not in the 4.5 degree trajectory anymore.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
I know.
Now it's like 2.6. It's still very bad,
Not great.
but but it's better than it was.
Yeah.
You know, and every point of a degree matters, obviously.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's what are you going to focus on, right?
I mean, and that's, we've been a lot of places with this conversation. To get it back, I guess, a little bit to what I do,
No, this is my favorite part.
So I work for this great organization, NH Healthy Climate, and it's focused on using the trusted voices of healthcare workers to communicate to the public that climate change is happening and their health impacts, and we need to know about them, and we need to respond to them, and we need to catalyze action around solutions, right? And, that idea is not new. We're part of this greater medical consortium on health and climate. There are other organizations similar to us around the country, but when your doctor tells you something, you listen, right? Because you trust them. And, we're trying to kind of piggyback on that. Like, hey, your doctors know about this about your health. They also can tell you this is actually happening, and here's what you can do. So my program within is specifically focused on children's health, physical and mental, because I'm trying to keep kids physically healthy and also mentally healthy. That's a huge deal. And what's interesting is, we don't necessarily have a part of our curriculum that is a mental health lesson, but by getting the kids outside, helping them to positively engage with their environment and be a part of the, both adaptation and mitigation process, it is helpful for their mental health. They are doing something. And then the other element of what I do is supporting the parents because they have to be in a good place mentally to be parents. And that was a huge realization for me. I definitely have climate anxiety, and I had not understood that where my mental space is, that will impact my son, right? So I have to address this myself, and then understanding that other parents were dealing with this and trying to help them as well. And that's really what I've been doing, and it's the great field that I found myself in, and I really enjoy it. And it's interesting because we are the only ones in the state doing something like this. And I'll tell you, even though we are part of the bigger consortium, we always get a lot of props for being like the biggest and most effective one in little old New Hampshire.
Interesting.
That's
very good. For goodness. This is the stuff we want to talk about.
Yeah. Well, our director of operations, Emily, is down in she's down in DC, and she gets to work with the bigger consortium, and they're always like, hey, like, what's going on in New Hampshire, and like, what's your kids program? That's cool, and we've gotten national attention because of it. Like, I'm speaking in Washington in a month about the program because people at the medical consortium conference, because they're like, what are you doing? That's pretty cool. And we're going to be on PBS in a couple months because this is interesting. You're not just doing climate cafes or children's work. You're combining them, and you're also not just working with high school kids. You're working with elementary school kids. Just like, well, that's crazy. How's that going? Pretty well, So it's different. And it's just like, I don't know. I feel like New Hampshire always outkicks its coverage. Like, we got like 1.5 million, give or take?
I don't know, 1.3.
Something in there. We should know this. But, we're out there. We're getting attention. We're doing things, and I think that's really fun, and I'm not in the camp of being, I love the state being like, we're better than Vermont or better than Massachusetts. Like, I think we have this awesome opportunity, and we do it a lot, to work with our neighbors, to learn from our neighbors and recognize that politically we're different. we have 400 representatives.
The third largest English-speaking legislative body
right
in the world, I
and
believe.
people in other states are like, this is crazy. And I'm like, I know. But,
Yes.
it sort of works for us sometimes. Yeah. We'll see if it's going to continue to work. But, like, being it where we are with that and then seeing Massachusetts and being like, wow, they are really ahead of us on certain things. But Massachusetts still looks to us and says, how do you work at the grassroots level?
Right.
Because that's what we're really good at.
Yeah.
So how can we work together and learn from them, from Maine, from Vermont, from, Connecticut, all the above, and, like really kind of power this corner that we have of the country.
Yeah.
We got to be like, I don't know, I'm not the best at this, but we have so many little states. I had a friend visit from California, and they were just like, I've been in 5 states today, in the same amount of time it takes me to go from one part of my state to the other.
Right.
Like, how do we continue to work together to have that level of impact?
Yeah. No, I love it. And it doesn't happen by accident,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a recurring theme. Mm-hmm. A good friend of mine, Dovev Levine, he works at the grad school at UNH and is also very involved in the Sustainability Institute there. And
Cool.
he's like you, he's like a network of networks. Like, he's always in these different networks. And one network that I think is really cool that he's a part of is this thing called NEMS, the New England Municipal Sustainability Network.
Huh.
And it's what it sounds like, right? It's a bunch of, municipal employees, right? Town managers of every site. They got people from Portland, they got people from, the Tamworths, right? Big towns, little towns, everything in between, all across New England. They curate for diversity of, size. And they're all just get together on the regular and, meet up in real life and are like, hey, what's going in your town? How can we advance, sustainability and climate issues on a local level across New England? And it's a highly effective organization. Like, they have a lot of success from orienting towards the kind of approach that you're talking about of like the grassroots. Let's lean into the human relationships and just meet up in real life, and you build up that social capital. And then when you come together and it's like, hey, we gotta push some paperwork or get a thing done, it's like, I know exactly who to call. Tommy at the homestead at the shack in Boomtown.
Yeah.
Oh my
God, this is the most press Tommy's gotten in a while. I love it.
But it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's right. It's being able to think, if you have a problem, being able to think of the person who can help you with that.
Yeah.
And I've had the opportunity to meet some great people like that. Like, there's a woman named Sarah Fox. I think she's in one of the
Sandborton?
one of the Sands.
Yeah.
She works with this, like, a coalition. It's like the Association Coalition of Children's, I don't know, but she is an amazing connector. And she's always thinking about, like, who I can, she's going to kill me for not knowing the name. I'm sorry, Sarah. Oh boy.
We'll put it in the show notes.
We'll put it in at the end. Yeah. So no, Sarah, she's always like, who can I connect you with? And she just always knows, and that's an amazing skill to have, because if you can't solve the problem yourself, you know who can.
Yeah.
Right? And that's something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it the New Hampshire Alliance of Early Childhood Coalitions?
There it is.
Yeah, I found her.
Fix it in post.
Yeah. No, it's great. This is a living, I don't care.
She's great. Like, and then, there's a woman I work with out in Rochester at the Rochester Child Care Center, Cora Hoppy, and she just, like, knows everybody.
Yeah.
And, she's able to make these connections as well. And that's what keeps things moving, And what's been interesting for me to watch is, like, so I have some of that New Hampshire experience in me. Like, I understand it's who you know up here. My husband came up here. He did not know anybody. Born in Massachusetts, raised in Connecticut, has a very strong Rhode Island connection.
Yeah.
But, like, nothing in New Hampshire. It was just me, and he's like, oh my God. And I didn't just drag him up here. I mean, I really did. But I think, like, on our second or third date, I brought him to the Friendly Farm in Dublin and brought him to Harrisville, and that was always a place. We were living in Cambridge, but I was bringing him up here, and we made this choice, and it's been amazing to watch him just, like, become this person that he already was. Like, he cares about people, and in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
And the way he's become a part of our community as well. Like, I was at the library. I'm used to people knowing me.
Right.
I was at the Dublin Library, and they're like, "You're James Finnegan's wife?" We love James. James was a trustee for a little while at the Dublin
You're
Library.
like, my James Finnegan?
I was
Is there
like,
another James Finnegan?
James? Like, no, but I mean, the women, they love him there because
Yeah.
he came in as this problem solver. He's not as outgoing, or, I can be gregarious at sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
he will listen and think when you're speaking before he speaks. I sometimes just speak. But he...
We need them both.
I know. We're the outgoing ones, but he was on the library trustees. He's in the energy committee. They're trying to get him to join the planning board, and he's like, I don't know if I can do all these things.
Yeah.
But, his goal is to become someone who works in New Hampshire. He's working remotely out of Massachusetts because he hasn't broken in here yet.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be a part of a bank, a mutual bank, something like that, where he can use these relationships to help lots of people.
He should
right?
work at Walden Mutual Bank.
He should work at Walden Mutual Bank. I know.
Charlie came on here.
I know he did. I
Great
know
guy.
he's one of the folks. But yeah, I think there is so much potential here for. And I'm not young anymore. I'm youngish. Of course, when I'm in Dublin, I'm young.
Oh, tell me about it. I interviewed I mean, I'm not going to call her a girl because it's patronizing, but it's my instinct. But she's 19.
Wow.
She's named Veronica. And I was just like, oh my God, all the stuff you're doing. I'm 29, so it's like a decade.
Yeah, and I got a decade on you.
It's all relative, though,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. So I know I have that problem too, because when you're 20 years removed from someone that young, but I think what you're going with it is that they're doing so much.
Oh, yeah. No, I was very
Doing
impressed.
So
yeah.
much. It's amazing. And I think, the struggle that this state often has is like this idea on how to keep people. And I feel like maybe even letting them leave and come back is just as powerful.
Yeah.
Because they've gotten to see what else there is there. And they've realized the value of being here.
Yeah.
Right? And, my husband and I both lived in D.C. at different points. I lived in New York, Boston, like 10 different places. And I was watching him yesterday. I guess it was 2 days ago. What is time? He was going to a...
At some indeterminate point.
I know.
In the
Well,
past.
the stomach bug hit our house, so I don't even know where I am.
Time's broken.
Time was broken. But he's getting ready to go on this work trip, and he's like, I got to bake this pie for the church dinner. I told him I'd bring it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Where am I? I'm watching this man because he'd made this promise to the people at the church about this thing, and it was just like, we are so in this community, and that is so cool.
Right.
And I want everybody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, to experience how good that feels, to connect with people, to, I can look many different ways. I used to just kind of like dress up like a bum and go to the grocery store, and it's like, nope, you will see 10 people at the grocery store.
That happened to me the other night, and I'm still not used to it.
Yeah.
Every time I go, I'm like, I'm not going to see anyone. And then you do it. It's like, oh, God.
Yeah, like, and I think I like it because when people see me actually like, made up for work or something, they're just like, oh, hey, this is what you look
Are
like.
you James
something?
Finnegan's wife?
Right. Again, that was a great moment because just, because I heard the other side of what it was like being on the library, but to have these older women just being like, oh, he's great. I'm like, yeah, he is. Yeah. It's just, it's fun. But I people ask me, like, oh, you've been in all these cities. Like, what are you doing up there? And I'm like, loving it, and being able to go up to Concord and see Sarah Fox, see Anna Berry, who's a good friend. I'm at the Forest Society now. She's got a new great role at Community Loan Fund, married to Jake Berry because everybody's connected.
Yeah.
Who worked at the Keene Sentinel. Oh, my God.
There you go.
Be able to see these two, be able to see an event with our representative, and then come home to our quiet little corner.
Yeah.
It's just like the best situation. And the way I think about it is like, we need the people in the cities. We need the people in the big places. Like, that's the way society has to run.
Right.
But like I have found where I'm, supposed to be.
Yeah.
I love being able to go down to DC for something, like for work or something, and then just come back and to, try to lead in that place with the small town, that experience informing it. Because having lived in Washington and spent formative years there, there's this tendency to think that what's being thought there is being thought everywhere.
Of course.
You know,
of course
and
you think that.
obviously we've
Right.
learned that's not the case. And, you know, I knew that when I was there, but now I'm living it.
Right.
Right. And that gives us, I feel like it gives me more understanding and I do my job better.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
there's advantages to, you know, cosmopolitanism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice to be able to like, I really like talking to people like you who, you know, they know the big wide world and they have like walked those halls of power, so to speak, and then to like have that experience and be like, actually, there's a lot of value and a lot of good that I can do here, right
Yeah.
in Dublin, actually.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's where I belong. But to have that experience and to like see the world and more of it and then to come back and, you know, it's very New Hampshire. I don't know what else
Yeah.
to say about it.
I know. And like you meet people in New Hampshire who are very interesting and they're doing lots of things.
Oh, I know.
Like from all, and then they come back,
Yeah.
you know, and you're just like, oh, this is wild. Like they can, you're right. It's that choice to, you're choosing New Hampshire. You know, sometimes it's not always easy for all the reasons I've said, like, you know, you can't go to CVS at, you know, a certain hour and,
Yeah.
but the trade-offs are well worth it. Again, it's just like planning
Right.
ahead. And the experience of, you know, we had this, we have this tree lighting in our town every year.
Yeah.
Which is so cute. Oh my God. It's in the, you know, Yankee Magazine is in my town. So like,
Yeah.
it doesn't get more, you know, New England iconic than like having Yankee in the middle of your town and then having the Christmas tree lighting next to Yankee.
Yeah.
Which is where we have
it's
it.
like it's like a Hallmark movie, but unironically and great.
It's better than
Yeah.
it's better than those because there's no big time business lady, although I guess that is me.
Yeah.
But like we had it every year, and this year it wasn't happening. And I'm always big on knowing when things happen well ahead of time. I'm a planner.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, haven't heard about the tree lighting. What's going on? And everybody I spoke to was like, ask this person, ask this person, ask this person.
And
I
then it
was
comes
like,
back around to the first person.
and it's not happening,
Right,
right? So
yeah.
you're like, oh, snap. So now we're either faced with not doing it, which seems like a crime, or putting it together.
Yeah.
And we did that in 2 weeks, right? You
Boom.
just, you know the people, you push it out there, and then you have the event,
Yeah.
you know? And that's why, just like it sums up why I love it. Like the town comes together and you have something that's important and you're able to work with people to make it happen. And I went down to the general store. If you've ever had a cookie from the Dublin General Store, if you haven't,
Nothing like it.
make a trip.
Yeah.
And Michelle was like, oh yeah, I'll donate. I don't remember. She gave us like 5 dozen. Yeah, 5 dozen cookies.
Yeah.
So that there solves that problem. I put it out there. We had some people bring cookies in, hot chocolate. Michelle also gave us the hot chocolate holder. I'm in my kitchen like an hour before boiling water
Right.
and bringing it up. And we had this wonderful little event. And I was singing, I was leading the song in front of the tree, and we have this video of my son singing along. And my husband just kind of like pans out to the rest of the town there. And it was
Yeah.
so cool. And it's like, these are experiences that they are straight out of a movie.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes I don't, even I who drive around being like, oh my God, you know, I don't understand how lucky we are
Oh, I know.
to have that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's weird. I toe the line like everybody in New Hampshire where you're like, my state's great, but like, you know, don't come here. And that's so different for me. I want everybody to come here. I'm
Right.
not that person.
Yeah.
You know, like tourism is great. I know we rely on. I want everybody to experience this.
Yeah.
But I wish they could all, you
Right.
know, like in some way live here.
Yeah.
Without there being 10 million people.
Yeah.
You know, in the state, because it really is. It's a special experience. You know.
Well, Maria, I could talk to you all day.
I know. We could.
I want to be respectful of your time.
What time is it? Let's see. Oh yeah.
Well, technically, we've been going for, including Maggie, 90 minutes, but Maggie was like 20 minutes.
that was 20 minutes.
Yeah. But all right. Closing question for
Yes.
you. What makes you optimistic about the future of your work or anything? Are you an optimist?
Man, that is a great question. I think because I'm half Eastern European, so I don't think I can. I don't know. That's not in my blood to be
Tell me about it.
optimistic.
I've had dinner the other night with a good friend of mine. His name's Cal, but he's Cal Manchigi, like the 14th.
Oh.
And then the other night I got to meet Cal the 13th.
Wow.
And they were super nice people, but I understand what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
some of it's baked in.
it is, you know, I got to experience that when before the war, I was over in Moscow and, you know, getting a better understanding of all those who came before me.
Yeah.
And you know, like the thing I kept hearing was, it was the war at the time, like for all the crazy things that happened, decisions that were made. So like, I think baked in, not always.
Sure.
But I'm really trying to change that because I know as a kid I was a big one.
Yeah.
You know, and I've spent time recently trying to tap back into all the things that made me that optimist and, you know, reconnecting with sports, reconnecting with colors and goofy things
Yeah.
and all the things that
Grilled cheese sandwiches.
yes. Honestly, that has come back and I love it. The more butter, the better. Also, why did I stop eating butter at some point? What was I thinking?
Yeah.
So, like, you know, just really leaning into what's good about being alive. And that's very difficult sometimes. But I'll say, like, in connection to my work, I think it's hard not to be optimistic when you see the number of people who are working on this,
Yeah.
right? And the smart people. And I'm not lumping myself in there. I'm just saying, like, when I go on LinkedIn, which is an interesting place, as you know, but it's just like, here's what we're doing, and here's what we're trying, and here are all the people that are working on it. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff in motion.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel it in my job. I feel it in, you know, my social circles. Like when something goes wrong, you know, I know there are people in our community who are going to step up. And I think that's something that sometimes has been lost, but it's really so important. You know, I just was reading an email from our minister, and there's a meal train that's, you know, in place. And I went to go sign up. There were no more spots.
Nice.
Because people were they had jumped into action. Like,
Yeah.
I know when there's a problem, there are people who are ready. And I guess that's why I feel positive. You know, I will say it is hard sometimes when there is a lot of bad news and when we do get hit with flooding again and
Right.
when you know, whatever. There are so many different things you can point to. But we've got some really cool, smart people working on it. And I think right now, what we're doing is we're fighting a bit of misinformation in climate specifically, and there are really bright people on that. I reconnected with an old college friend who was in communications as well, and he's working in climate, and it was like shooting back X number of years to broadcast journalism at Syracuse University,
Yeah.
and it's funny, we're both a little jaded, a little hardened,
Right.
you know, but like, what we bring to that conversation is joking. Oh, it's so tough, but like just feeling so grateful that we're a part of this.
You're still doing the work.
We're still doing the work.
Yeah.
We've found our way into being a part of the solution.
Right.
And as hard as that is, it feels good,
Yeah.
right? So I have to be. I think I have to be optimistic for my son at the root of it all. But I also am inundated with good information all
Yeah.
the time. Even when you have a dark day for
Yeah.
one reason or another, even as the California wildfires were hitting, you know, oh my God, it was awful.
Yeah.
And I saw that play out in every place I look, but there were also people, you know, helping on the scene and planning forward and connecting and figuring out how to, you know, use this opportunity, which sounds crummy because it was an awful thing, but like, how can we use this to help people? Like, how
Yeah.
can we move things forward? And, you know, I feel people are less stunned and, you know, like to the point where they can't do anything and now they're just ready to act
Yeah.
because we do have good people working on it. And no, I feel good about that. I know in the state I've met good people working on things. It's fun to get together with them and talk about positive things.
Yeah.
You know, and no, I feel I'm grateful. And, you know, I could talk forever about this, but like there's a group here, the Monadnock Sustainability Hub.
Oh, yeah.
Which
They're great.
I was just elected to the board of, which was super cool. I was
Oh,
like,
right
you
on.
want, I was like, you want me? And they're like, we want you. Very excited.
They often make it into my Good News in New Hampshire newsletter. A lot of
They're
the
awesome.
stuff they do. Yeah.
What an amazing group of people. And I was sitting there and I was just like, wow. Like, you know, those meetings are good for me.
Yeah.
Because what's amazing about them is they are doing so much and a lot of people don't know
Yeah.
about all the stuff they're doing. And my goal is to add to your work, which is to put it out there.
Yeah, it's all.
We need to tell people.
Yeah.
And those kind of groups are all over the state.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's so many.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I have to feel positive.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, I don't remember his name, but the guy who runs Project Drawdown or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
He says that, when you look at the data, it's hard to be optimistic about, climate. But when you look at the people, he's like, you can't not feel optimistic, right? And it's like,
That's
I like,
awesome.
I like it's the same thing you said just
Yeah.
now. Well, for what it's worth, I would put you in that category of motivated, smart people. I think you belong there. But this is really fun, Maria. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey there, thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator and host of Granite Goodness, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.